Hello, and welcome to the High Reliability Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Martin, president of Gosselin Martin Associates. As always, the High Reliability Podcast is brought to you by the Career Hub. You can find more information about the Career Hub on the Gosselin Martin Associates website at gosselin-associates.com. I'm very pleased and honored to have as a guest today James Shoemaker with me. Jim is a longtime healthcare facilities management professional with a very interesting career background. Jim jumped into healthcare facilities management following a distinguished military career in which he retired as a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force with medals for a Bronze Star and an Air Medal with 4 Oak Leaf clusters. Following his military career, Jim has a very interesting story of how he found his way into healthcare facilities management. Jim was an assistant director of engineering at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey. And then he became director of plant operations and chief engineer at Deborah Heart and Lung Center in Browns Mills, New Jersey. Jim found his way into those positions after working as a senior mechanical engineer with the New Jersey Department of Health in Trenton. And I thought, I see Jim, if you go to the ASHE conferences, you see Jim quite frequently there. Jim, congratulations. He won the Crystal Eagle Award during last year's ASHE annual conference. Last year's ASHE annual was July 2022 in my hometown of Boston. And I said to myself, let's have Jim on the podcast. And I'm very honored that he joins us today. Jim, welcome to the High Reliability Podcast. Thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's delightful to be aboard, and I'd be delighted to engage in this little endeavor.
Great. I teased it, Jim, in the introduction for you. Let's kind of start in the midpoint or the transition of your career. How'd you find yourself into healthcare facilities management out of the military?
Well, when I retired from the Air Force in 1980, I was firing out resumes and not getting anywhere. So I decided to just throw myself a beer party in my backyard. And it just so happened that
what kind of beer? What kind of beer did you have for your beer party? What did you buy?
I don't know. It's probably just the standard old Budweiser.
Yeah.
But years later, I decided that I was thinking of too much about beer all the time, and whether I had enough in the refrigerator or whether I had enough at home or for the weekend. So I decided that if that's all I'm going to think about, I just might as well just stop drinking beer. So I did that back in the early 1980s.
Okay.
So,
but you had your party first.
So I had the party first, yeah, and so I'm sitting there in the backyard overlooking Crosswicks Creek, which is a beautiful tributary of the Delaware River, and a man sat down next to me. His wife knew my wife, and I had never met either one of them, and so they were both invited. And he says, "Well, now, Jim," he says, "I understand you just retired from the Air Force. What are you doing?" And I said, "I've been sending out these resumes and getting nowhere." And he said, "Do you have a degree in anything?" And I said, "Yeah, mechanical engineering from University of Maryland." And he said, "Oh my gosh," he said, "we're looking at the New Jersey Department of Health." He says, "I'm a deputy commissioner of health there, and we're looking for what is called a senior mechanical engineer. Would you willing to come down and have an interview?" And I said, "I'll be in your office at 9 o'clock Monday morning." And he said, "Great." So he hired me on the spot. I started working there at the state. It was very boring looking at blueprints all day long in the plan review section. So I decided to get away from my boredom by go ahead and go to Rider College and work toward my master's degree, which I started doing about a week later. And I met the chief nurse and the assistant chief nurse at St. Francis Medical Center. It's a large 600-bed hospital in Trenton, New Jersey, and they enticed me to go put in for a job opening that had just come opened for the assistant director of engineering there at St. Francis. So I thought, well, gee, this sounds pretty good. I think I'll check that out. So with with my alleged, I did have the piece of paper that I graduated as a mechanical engineer, but I hadn't worked in it for the whole 24 years that I had in the service. And I did have this other job reviewing hospital plans, so I guess I was pretty hot commodity. Although I really didn't know too much about what was going on in the healthcare or even engineering. So I went to St. Francis Medical Center and interviewed for the job, and they snapped me right up. Luckily, there was a man there named Bill Companion, who was the director of engineering, and he was a delightful person, and he kind of nurtured me along. And to get down to the point here, how I got involved in ASHE, and I was there for about 3 weeks, and he said, Jim, he said, call your wife, tell her you're not going to be home for dinner because we're going to go out to dinner somewhere. And I said, what are we going to do? And he said, we're going to go up to North Jersey. There's this society up there, this little club, and it's called the Executive Hospital Engineers of New Jersey. And I want to introduce you to the guys and see what gives there, and maybe you can make some contacts up there too, and learn your trade. So I went up there, and the meeting was in November, and they were having election of officers. So the president got up and he said, "Well, we have a treasurer, we have the president-elect already earmarked, and we have the president that's earmarked. We just need a secretary." So somebody looked in my direction and said, "Well, what about the new guy?" So I turned around. It was just a brick wall behind me. So I figured it wasn't the brick wall. So I said, "Yeah, I could do that. I could try that." And so the next day, Henry Wiesner, who was a highly respected hospital engineer from a hospital up in North Jersey, he called me up at my office in Trenton, and he said, "Jim," he said, "we're a good bunch of guys. We all help each other. We do good things for healthcare facilities management, and we railroaded you last night, and we don't want to. We're not built that way. We don't do that." And he said, "You can back out if you want." So I said, "Well, I'll just hang in there. It'd be good for me to get to know the guys and everything." So uh, I guess a couple of years, well, in 1984 it was actually. Um, I had went to my first ASHE conference in 19 in that year, and it was in it was in the Diplomat Hotel in Hollywood, Florida. And my dear friend George Thomas, who was a vice president of the hospital center at Orange up in North Jersey, we both went to that conference for the first time ever for the two of us. And so we got there, and we're sitting in the audience, and the screen rolls back, the curtains roll back, and here's these 10 people sitting on this stage. And I mentioned to George, I said, "What in the heck's going on here?" He said, "Well, I don't really know. Let's see what happens." So they were introduced as the board members of the American Society for it was called the American Society for Hospital Engineering, and they were board members. Each one of them represented a certain region of the United States, and our region happened to be New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Washington D.C., and Pennsylvania. So I remarked to George, just kind of a casual remark. I said, "George, wouldn't it be cool to be on a national board of directors?" And he said, "Well, I guess so, yeah." So a couple of years later, I had switched jobs with with St. Francis Medical Center because I heard of a opening for the director of engineering at Deborah Heart and Lung Center, which is just heart, lung, and vascular. It's in South Jersey, Browns Mills, New Jersey, and everything was free. They didn't charge a patient. They lived on donations and Medicare payments. So with my wonderful background and all these nice tickets that I had that really didn't mean anything because I still didn't know much.
Yeah, you're faking your way to the top pretty quickly, Jim.
It was like it was that guy that was the name of the movie was The Imposter.
Yeah,
and that guy in the movie he assumed the role of many different things, culminating with he simulated that he was somehow he got on a Navy ship and he was put himself forward as a Navy doctor on board of a submarine, and they had a require for an appendectomy, and this guy actually performed the appendectomy by looking up things in medical books that just happened to be on that ship. So anyway, we go fast forward to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Nancy Montenegro. I saw her standing there, and I was talking to somebody else, and I get this tap on my shoulder. It was Nancy Montenegro, and she was currently the executive director of the American Society for Hospital Engineering. She tapped me on the shoulder. She said, "Congratulations, Jim." And I said, "What's that all about?" She said, "You were nominated to be on the ASHE, to be elected to the ASHE Board of Governors, the Board of Directors for Region 2, your region." And I said, "Well, who did that?" And she said, "Well, George Thomas was contacted, and they made him the chair of the nominating committee." So evidently, based on a conversation that he had with you, Jim, he nominated you because he overheard you say that it might be nice to be on a national board. So, and I had not campaigned for it; it just sort of happened.
So this is 1988, 89 right now?
Yeah, this was 88.
Okay.
And
so
then if
8 years after the beer party, shortly after telling George, wouldn't it be cool to be on a national board?
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. So in 83, I was elected, and in 1989, I was actually an official member of the board of directors of ASHE.
Wow.
Pretty quick. Really surprised me anyway. But that was very enlightening, and I learned a lot more, and I became a sponge. I went to every single seminar at the annual conference. I went to if there was any seminars back home in Jersey or Pennsylvania, I would make sure that I could go. My hospital was very liberal in letting me attend these things and do these things. All the while, my boss thought for years that I was a professional engineer, and he a PE, and you know, you don't just get to be a PE. It's right. Work and study, and
yeah.
I kept telling him I'm just a graduate engineer from Maryland. I'm not a professional engineer. And he says, "Yeah, okay, all right."
So, he didn't believe you?
No, evidently, all along he thought I was a PE. Of course, that's another story, because to become a PE, it is a lot of work.
Yes.
But not that I wasn't willing to do it. And meanwhile, I had completed my master's degree anyway, just to wrap that story up. But if you're a PE and you sign off on a drawing, then you're taking responsibility for every line and blur and tear that's in that piece of paper. So, it's not that I would shirk responsibility, but I just never got to that point.
Right, that's a different level of responsibility.
Yeah, it would have been hard. It would have been hard for me to fake that.
Might have been easier to do the appendectomy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, would be hoping and praying that I was in the middle of it was a parallel universe and I was doing the appendectomy at the time.
Absolutely. Wow.
So that's about how I got in it. So I was a board member. Oh, and my boss, I approached my boss at Deborah and I said, I'd like to, I'd like to do this. I needed his permission. He said, well, does it mean you're going to be gone from the hospital? I said, yes, sir. It's probably, several days because I'm required to visit all of our chapters in our region. And he said, well, okay, you can do it, but he said, you're not going to do it. How long is the tour? And I said, well, 2 years. He said, well, do your 2 years, and then that's it. That's it. So if the whole 2 years, I agonized because I wanted to do the other 2 years because you're allowed to do two 2-year terms.
Mm-hmm.
So I agonized almost daily about when the time came closer that I had to ask him if I could do it again. As a matter of fact, I developed some kind of an agita about it. And since Deborah was a heart and lung hospital, I went to the hospital doctor and I said, I'm getting all this agita and heart beating rapidly and stuff. And he said, well, you came to the right place. And so they did a heart catheterization because I had the anxiety of
Wow.
going in to seeing my boss and him saying I couldn't do it.
Wow.
So so I had the heart catheterization, and the guy said he said you got the heart of a 60-year-old man, and I said, well, thanks a lot. That doesn't make me very happy. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, I'm only 59. So one more little thing about that. He left there was a resident there that was kind of observing the catheterization and so on. So the main doctor turned me over to this resident, and he said, keep tracking Mr. Shoemaker's heart rate, and get your stethoscope down there and monitor his heart, make sure everything is okay, because we have to let some of this anesthesia wear off and so on. And so the doctor left, and the resident is sitting there, and so he takes out his. He comes over to him and he says, I'm gonna do some pulse work. And he put the end of the stethoscope on my carotid artery in my groin, and he he had forgotten to put the earpieces in his ears, and the stethoscope is still hanging around his neck. So he's got the receiver down there, and he started to frown, and he started to frown again, and he's frowning, and he takes it off and taps it, and there's no sound. So he looks very at me very sheepishly, and he grabs the earpieces, puts them in his ear, and then then resumes trying to get my pulse. But I wanted to laugh in the worst way, but I didn't want to embarrass this poor guy. I figured he was embarrassed enough.
He didn't say anything?
No, he didn't. I don't think he dared say anything.
Yeah.
He probably didn't want to ever say anything, I guess, in his whole life. But I never told the regular doctor that story. But
yes, I need a new doctor. So let me ask. I mean, just kind of going down the road.
Yeah.
You don't serve another term on the advisory board for Region 2. You do become ASHE president-elect and president in 93, 94. So you were, you landed in the hospital because of the agita over serving another advisory board term. How did you end up president?
Well, I sheepishly, when the time came, I went to my boss.
You know what I was thinking, Jim? When you were telling that story, I was thinking you should have, while you were in the hospital bed, you should have paged him and asked him if you could serve another term while you were in your hospital bed. You might have gotten the sympathy vote from him.
Well, that was just that wasn't really a that was just a outpatient.
Ah, okay,
They
okay,
just
in and out.
as far as I can remember, yeah. So then the time came that I had to get his okay, and I made an appointment, went up to his office, and he said, I said, Joe, I'd like to run for another term because I'm allowed two-year terms. He says, yeah, why not?
Huh.
So all that agony and the catheterization and everything was for naught. So
And you got insulted when they told you had a 60-year-old heart.
yeah, plus I get insulted on the side. So two more years passed. So now it's 1988, and it's my last year of on the board.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's 1988. No, excuse me. It's
Is it 92?
yeah, it was yes, that's right, exactly. It's 92,
92.
1992.
Okay.
And so in 1992, I ran for president of ASHE, and I did get elected, and I was the president elect in 1990. It was 1993 actually.
Okay.
So I was president elect in 1993, and then ASHE president in 1994.
Boy, that's a
No,
yeah.
wait a minute. That was no. I went on. I went on the ASHE. Yeah, I went on the ASHE board in '89.
Yep, and then
So
93, 94, president-elect and president.
that's right.
All within 14 years.
Yeah.
That's yeah. Well, did you said as you were talking, thinking about just your career path from 1980 to 1994, I was once talking to somebody and they told me that one of the secrets of success to their career, and one of the ways that they just kind of kept taking on increasing responsibility, is because they would always say yes to what somebody asked them to do. They'd say yes, yeah, I'll do it, yeah, I'll do it, yeah, I'll do it. You sound very similar, Jim, in that healthcare portion of your career from 80 to 94. People would ask you to do things, you'd say yes, and you would figure out how to do it if you didn't know how to do it. Is that an accurate statement, that just saying yes kind of helped you advance pretty quickly?
Well, it's possible. I mean, of course, you have to say yes with a qualifier.
Yep.
Uh, you know, depending on what it is and everything. And they say in the military, don't volunteer for anything, but I think that's a mistake because the more you volunteer, the better you get known, and especially especially if you're doing a good job.
Right.
You
Right.
have to. That's a key there to do the good job.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you say yes, do the good job.
But I think the ASHE is well known for their networking and mentoring, and I attribute my success from people that were willing to help me out and lead me through and show me the ropes and encourage me, and as I tried to pay back by doing that with other people, I hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the key to the success of any organization or any person, I believe.
Now I know, you've mentioned George Thomas a couple of times in this podcast, and I recall, what did George win the Crystal Eagle? What was that, 2019 or so? I remember seeing you and George together
Yep,
at
George
one of the
did.
Ashes when he was there. What year was he was there with his family? What year did he win? Was that 2019, right before COVID hit?
Uh, I think it was
I think it
it was before the COVID.
before the COVID hit. How was he one of your early? Was he one of your key early connections in your career for health, in your healthcare career?
Well, George was George belonged to the North Jersey group,
Mm-hmm.
then of course then called the Executive Hospital Engineers, and George had a lot to offer. I knew he had a lot to offer, and he was sitting in the back of the room, and he really never said anything. So I encouraged George to to run for secretary. in our little organization. And so he did, and he blossomed and bloomed. And the hospital center at Orange, when I reviewed them, because I was writing his, trying to write his Crystal Eagle Award narratives, you had to get all sorts of backup from his previous employers and his bosses and all that. And I was told by his boss, the CEO of the hospital, that they didn't do anything at all at that hospital, construction wise or, or renovation or anything, without consulting George. George emanated from a small town in Alabama, and after high school, he ended up being a kind of a mule in a foundry, and just carrying heavy bags of clay on his back. And George is a self-made was a self-made man, and he decided to get on a train and come up to. I know I'm getting far afield, but
No, it's okay.
get on a train and come up to Jersey, and he got that job as a laborer in the hospital center at Orange, and then he bloomed and blossomed, and he's a good role model for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Did
might mention that George was black, and there was a lot of discrimination going on, and it pains me and makes me feel ashamed and terrible that George ran for president of ASHE a couple of times, and I think that's the reason he didn't get elected, is because of the nefarious way that a lot of people felt
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
about things.
Sure,
But
sure.
anyway,
Did you ever ask him, Jim? I'm wondering, did you ever ask him why he settled on Jersey from Alabama to New Jersey?
no, I never did, but I just assumed that he just arrived up here, and yeah, that's a question I could have asked. I don't think he had family up here.
Yeah, uh, it's just interesting. I always wonder. I don't want to think. I just that's why I like talking to people on the podcast. And obviously, unfortunately, we don't have George. But I always like to just ask people, how'd you end up where why'd you pick there? How'd you pick that location of all, of all locations? But that's quite all right. So you're in '94 now, 14 years in your career. When did you, Jim, start to feel like you were, you talked about faking it a couple of times, but how did you, like, you're doing all of this while you're learning a new field, while you're running a hospital, and I called it Deborah Heart instead of Deborah, so I
Yeah,
apologize for
that's
that.
okay.
But
Sure.
how did you fit everything in very early on to learn what you needed to learn and run hospitals? You're doing a lot. So how did you do that? And when did you finally feel like, what, I feel comfortable?
Well, you don't want to to answer the latter part of your question. Um, I think if you let yourself feel comfortable with the knowledge and the experience that you have, you're going to be a loser, because you should never feel comfortable, because they're changing technology, because of changing cultures, and God knows, the Lord knows that our culture is changing rapidly as we speak, in the United States and elsewhere. So I don't think you should ever, if you start feeling comfortable, there's maybe something wrong, because you should be constantly learning and uh, uh, researching new ideas. I feel that if you don't learn a couple of new things each day, that day is sort of partially lost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what kept me going, the constant trying to sponge up some more stuff.
Yes, but it's a good way to that's a good way to put it. And there's a lot to sponge up in this field. When did you, Jim, step away from Deborah? When did you retire? And I hesitate to say retire because I saw you just last week at the Delaware Valley Engineer Spring Conference and you're still out there. But when did you step away from the hospital full time? How many years ago now?
Well, it was actually it was 1998, and I was at Deborah, and they came out with an announcement that they wanted uh, to enhance the retirement money that you would get, either an annuity or a lump sum payment. They had some doctors there that had been there for, figuratively centuries. And at Deborah, the doctors don't, like in other institutions, doctors did not do piecework there at Deborah. And by piecework, I mean they weren't told that they had to get see 12 patients an hour or 12 patients a day or something. You could have a doctor, a cardiologist at Deborah, and uh, you could sit in his office all day, and it doesn't matter. But these doctors were getting pay raises every year. They were getting old, and Deborah wanted to kind of purge them out. So I was 64 years old at the time, and I thought, well, gee, this something above me is telling me that this might be a good idea to step down and look into something else. And so I did. I applied for the retirement, and it worked out great. That's kind of a sidelight on that. You had your choice of taking an annuity or a lump sum, and every financial expert that I've ever talked to has said, don't ever take an annuity, because they take an awful lot of money out of the annuity, and it's not a good deal. There was a famous radio broadcaster uh, on a Philadelphia station that just preached, don't do an annuity. So I came home, told my wife that I was retiring, and I said, I have a chance to do an annuity or a lump sum. And she said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'm not going to do the annuity because it borders on being a scam. And I'd like to do some research on my own and take a lump sum. And she said, well, that sounds pretty good. Tell me more about it. So I told her that I needed her signature to do the lump sum. And so she said, well, I'm not gonna do it. She said, I think you should take the annuity. And she said, because and you should, and your annuity is a lot less if you take it, and with the wife, uh, if you pass, then it goes over to the wife. And I said, look, there'll probably be enough of a lump sum to take care of it. So she adamantly said that she would not do it. So I'm at Human Resources that day, and the hour of noon had come, and I was sitting at the desk with my pen in my hand to take the annuity. And she walked in the door and she said, I'll sign off for you.
Oh, wow.
So I was able to, luckily, I was able to make some real good investments. And so it turned out a lot better.
What changed with your wife? Why did she suddenly decide to do
I
so?
don't know.
That's it's almost like it's almost like a television show coming down to the end, right? Except it's real life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So did you, Jim, in '98? Did you retire fully? Did you do anything part time? What'd you do at that point?
Well, in 1998, when I retired, I didn't do anything for 4 years.
Wow,
Didn't do
nice.
anything at all.
Yep,
And then in 1992,
2002.
uh, yeah, let's see, 19, yeah, 1998. 1998 was when I retired. So in in 2802, that was 4 years later,
Yep, 2002. Yep.
um, I bought a Lexus, and I was still active with the local chapter of ASHE. But I bought a Lexus, and they pretty much on the spot they asked me if I'd be willing to be a valet for Lexus. This is after I was retired for
Yeah.
and not doing anything for 4 years. So I decided, yeah, well, why not? I'll try it. So I was a valet delivering cars to people that had left them in for service
Oh, cool.
and to pick up their loaner.
Yeah.
And so then Lexus recruited me to be to deliver auto parts. So I did that all that stuff with Lexus for 12 years.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I was only working maybe 1 or 2 days a week for all that time delivering the auto parts.
Yeah. Well,
But I'm just doing activities, minor activities on the side, swimming and playing golf and stuff.
yeah, that's an interesting transition into that, but you have those opportunities. So, I'm going back a little bit. Let's go back a little bit
Sure.
now to kind of military. Did you want to join? Did you want to go into the Air Force? Was that your career goal when you were, pre-college, college age, or how did the military experience happen for you?
Well, I when I graduated from high school in 1951, my father had gone to Maryland, so he sort of encouraged me to go to Maryland. So I went down there, and it was 1951. If you'll remember, look at your history, the Korean War was going on, and they had Air Force ROTC down there at Maryland, and it's a land grant college, and they were required at that time to have a Reserve Officer Training Corps ROTC. So I knew I had to do it for 2 years. So then now it's 1954, and I had to decide whether to sign up for advanced ROTC, which would mean I would commit, my remaining 2 years in college. I would commit that to advanced ROTC, and then I would graduate as a second lieutenant. And being committed, I would be required to serve 2 years. So I did not want to graduate from college and be drafted in the Army. I just did not want to do
Mm.
that. And I figured the Air Force is a little bit more, I don't know, I don't want to badmouth the Army because
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to do that.
Sure.
It's
Sure.
just a feeling that I had. I wanted to be in the Air Force instead
Hmm.
or the Navy. Didn't really matter to me. So that's why I went to advanced ROTC. Incidentally, there's a side issue there. When I signed up for advanced ROTC, entering my junior year, I went to there was nothing online. There was no online anything. You go to
No,
this
not at
huge
all.
you go to this huge armory, and there's people standing around and waiting in line to schedule their calculus class and their this
Mhm.
and that,
Yep.
thermodynamics. So I get up to the ROTC desk and I said, Jim Shoemaker signing up for advanced ROTC, and they said, "Well, you're not on our list." And I said, "What?" They said, "You weren't accepted for advanced ROTC." And I said, "Well, I know my tactical officer, Captain Cox, told me he was going to highly recommend me." He said, "Well, you didn't get selected." So I went and found a phone booth, called my father, and I said, "Dad, I didn't get it selected for advanced ROTC." And he said, "Jim," he said, "I'm up here in Point Pleasant Beach, New Jersey. You're down in College Park, Maryland." He said, I don't know what to tell you. You're going to have to work it out." So I went down to the my fraternity house. I put on my ROTC uniform. I walked all the way back up. I didn't have a car. Didn't have a car until I was married and going into active duty in the Air Force. Anyway, uh, I had my uniform on, and I knew the colonel was there at the armory. He had an office there at the armory. So I kind of got by his secretary and said I had something important to talk to the colonel about. Professor of Air Science and Tactics was his title. And I said, "Sir, I don't understand why I didn't get accepted. Captain Cox recommended me and everything." And he said, "Well," he said, "let me look at the master list." He said, "You were accepted." He said, "You were, and I see that you were accepted with, with a high recommendation." He said, "Look, I'm going to write you a slip here. Take it back down there and go register." So that was a umbilical cord
Yeah.
severance,
Yeah.
and a eureka moment in my life.
Yep. Yep. What do you remember? I don't know. I mean, it's long ago now, but when your dad, said to you, Jim, I'm up here, Point Pleasant, New Jersey, you're down College Park, Maryland. Do you remember what you thought at that time? Was that, was there a finality to that when he said that, or were you're like, it's all on me now? Do you recall how you felt?
Well, the way I felt was I felt that I was now on my own,
Yeah. Yep.
and in a couple of years I would be really on my own because I'd be graduating from. My father was all he was a teller, a bank teller in a small, very small town bank.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was a college graduate, but that's what he did. And I didn't want to be. I wanted to do something that was likable and rewarding in some way. So
Yeah. Well,
so I wanted to. Here's another story about fraud. I guess fraudulent activities on my part. Um, when I was in my final year at Maryland, I had to go in there for a final surgery, a physical examination prior to entry in active duty and prior to being signed in as a second lieutenant. So I drove down to Bowling Field, which is down in D.C., outside of D.C., Washington D.C., and going through the pee in a jar and check your heart and do all this stuff. And one of the things was the test that you've probably done it, and some of your listeners probably have too, where they have this booklet with a lot of dots on each page, and there's numbers concealed in these dots,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called a color blindness test.
Mm.
So the I'm sitting in front of this desk, and there's a sergeant behind the desk, and he opens up this little booklet, and he said, "What number do you see there?" And I could just barely make out a 7. And so he turned the page, and it was totally just a bunch of colored dots. There was nothing there that I could see at all, except all these colored dots. And I just happened to look up. There was another sergeant standing behind him, and this guy holds up 5 fingers on one hand and 2 on the other hand. And I looked down at the dots again, and I said 7. And he turned the page again, and the guy was flashing me the numbers.
Wow. Wow. Did-
So they said, "Okay, you're all clear. You're accepted. All you have to do is attend the commissioning ceremonies. I'm sure you want your parents there and everything." So I went home before that last semester was over, and I told my mother. I guess it might have been Easter vacation. I'm not sure what it was, but I said, "Mother," I said, I did a bad thing. Uh, I'm qualified to be a navigator because I passed the physical, and I want to be a navigator or a pilot because, well, I couldn't be a pilot because my vision wasn't good enough. So because I want that extra $100 a month.
Hmm.
And she said, "Well, what did you do?" And I said, "I cheated in eye exam, and I'm actually colorblind, and I cheated." And I told her the situation. She said, "Look, we'll go up to Asbury Park, 10 miles away. This doctor up there, and we'll have you examined." And so we went up there, and sure enough, I couldn't read those numbers. And the guy brought out this tray of yarn, and I think it was red pieces of yarn and uh, green pieces of yarn in little balls. And he said, this is the yarn separation test. He said, separate the yarn. So I did that, and I did it it did it perfectly. He says, you're not really colorblind, you're color ignorant. And I said, yeah, but I'm going to be a navigator, and I can't be colorblind. He says, you're not colorblind, you won't be cheating anybody, you're perfectly okay. So that was a rewarding experience because I discovered a limitation, and I wanted to do something about it in a positive way.
Yep.
And not kill somebody, by being fraudulent.
Right.
And so then I get into the service, and if you're colorblind, if you're a navigator, you only have one test your entire career. If you could be in 34 years, and they only test you once. But pilots, and incidentally, Peter, colorblindness, once you have it forever. It doesn't get cured. It doesn't go away. So, but the Air Force tests pilots every year for colorblindness, but they never test the navigator but once.
Huh? Why is that?
I
mean, because you're the navigator.
I don't. Well, and the navigator. My first 13 years in the Air Force, I had to do a lot of map reading because I was dropping paratroopers all the time. I was in tactical airlift, dropping paratroopers. So I had to fly. We had to fly 1,250 feet off the ground for an hour and a half route to get to the drop zone, and I had to be there by navigating. I had to be there within 10 seconds of the drop time.
Wow.
So, and I had to look out the window and see where I was relative to the ground. The WAC charts are all color coded as far as terrain is concerned. So, and I had absolutely no trouble with that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So was that over in Vietnam?
No, that was at Seward Air Force Base, Tennessee. I was stationed there 5 years, and then they transferred me to Okinawa for 3 years, which I was doing the same thing, dropping troops. Incidentally, luckily, from 62 to 65, when I was in Okinawa, I was flying airlift missions in and out of Southeast Asia, and I was experiencing the buildup to the Vietnam War.
Yeah,
and we were taking strange-looking people, which turned out to be CIA agents, and dropping them off at weird places in Vietnam and Laos and various places.
Wow.
And so I saw the complete, we didn't know the buildup was going on. But oddly enough, in 1963, I was at the Ambassador Hotel, right bordering the Mekong River in downtown Saigon. And all of a sudden, the sky is full of airplanes, and they're dropping things from the airplanes, the little single-engine airplanes. And when that thing reaches the ground, it blows up. The Vietnamese Navy was attacking the Vietnamese army, and the war was it was the beginning of the overthrow of Diem, which was the president of Vietnam. And I was there on the top of this with my crew.
Wow.
On the top of this hotel overlooking the city, watching tanks rumble through the street.
Wow.
And the next day we got up, and we had to fly our C-130 back to Okinawa, and we passed all this devastation and everything, and lucky to get out of there.
Yeah. Wow.
So then several years later, I got sent back as to fly it was called the AC-119 K gunship, where it was the old C-119, the old twin-tailed airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And they installed 6 guns on the side of the airplane. We'd fly up to Laos and pick up moving trucks in the middle of the night, and on an infrared screen, like a TV screen, only it was picking up infrared IR, and the truck would show up. Since the truck was heated, it would show up as a green blotch on the screen, and we knew that it was trucks coming down from from the north to resupply the North Vietnamese. So we would just open up our guns and blow the trucks up.
Wow. Wow.
We had a bad night one night where I was tracking a truck. My infrared operator was tracking this, who sat next to me. I was the navigator, and
How big's the crew, Jim?
we had 12 on the crew.
Okay.
And so we're tracking this truck, and all of a sudden the truck goes perpendicular into the jungle, and we had never seen that before. So we talked about it, and I gave the pilot. I told the pilot, I said, "You're clear to when you latch onto this thing, you're clear to fire." And what he had to do was put his head to the left, and they had a tank, a U.S. tank gun sight attached to the side of the airplane, and he'd look out. Very rudimentary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We had four 7.62 miniguns, cannons, and then two 20 millimeter cannons on one on each side of that, for a total of 6 guns. So we went up there and blew up this supposed truck. So we had when the debriefing occurred, we got back to South Vietnam for our base. I asked the reconnaissance guys I gave them the coordinates, and I asked them to go out and do a reconnaissance photograph. And what we had done was we blew up an elephant.
Oh, wow.
And it ruined my day, because I love animals so much. And so the North Vietnamese were strapping ammo and ammunition
Wow.
and stuff on the backs of these elephants because
wow.
we were picking up the trucks, and that was their way of getting back.
Wow. Jeez. They were a crafty enemy, huh?
Yeah, crazy
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah. And the recon is able to pick that up when they go back over?
Yeah, I gave them. Yeah, they took the high definition pictures of this
Wow.
elephant. Elephant parts were there, and it was at the
Wow.
coordinates that I gave them.
What did you what were you flying at, Jim? What's your elevation?
Well, what we did, and it's interesting you ask, because the whole thing was attributable to this young captain that was stationed at Langley Air Force Base, Virginia, and he had read an article that they had the Goonie Bird, the old DC-3, the C-47 version. The Air Force version was the C-47. It's an old, reliable airplane, 2-engine reciprocating engines. That he found out that they were delivering mail and picking up mail in the Andes Mountains. These locations were very hard to get to because of mountains and everything, but they'd find a flat area, and they found that if they flew at a certain altitude, at a certain airspeed, and a certain bank, they could scroll out on a rope or a cable a barrel that would go right straight down. In other words, so you've got this airplane making a circular pattern with a 30-degree bank, and so you've got an inverted pyramid with the apex of the pyramid on the ground, and then the base of the pyramid, the inverted pyramid, is the circular motion in which the airplane is traveling at the angle required. And you could lower this barrel full of mail or food or whatever down to that ground, and they could just pick it up, dump that out, put return stuff in there, and they'd be on their way. So he said, well, if we could do that with a barrel of mail, why don't we put guns on the side of an airplane, bore sight the guns, fly at a specified altitude, a specified airspeed and bank. Why can't we do the same thing and bore sight guns to blow the heck out of something that's on the ground, maybe a truck or something, or a enemy base or something? So that's how that evolved.
Mm. Wow,
Yeah, it's ingenious actually.
yeah, it
So
is.
to answer your question, we flew at either 2,500, 3,500. Very rarely did we ever fly above 3,500. So
Wow.
we were open to ground fire all the time.
Yeah.
And one of my friends, Al Malachek and his crew, uh, they had 18 feet of their C-119 blown off, and that's another whole story. But they made it back to home base.
Did they really?
Incredible.
Yeah. How'd they do that?
Well, he actually was they were home based at Da Nang, which is the northern part of South Vietnam. The wing was blown off just after they left the target area,
Mm.
and it was within 1 or 2 degrees of Da Nang because they couldn't make a turn because they had to have
Yeah.
several people in the cockpit keeping the rudder turned so that the airplane would have naturally be fall off to that side of the airplane where the 18 feet of the wing was shot off. So they had to turn the rudders and everything the other way to keep the airplane straight and level so they could land. And luckily, they couldn't make any turns.
Yeah.
So luckily they were within, several degrees of the of the runway heading at Da Nang, and it was just
Wow.
by mere luck.
Yeah.
The pilot, who was a friend of mine, a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guy. He was a Oklahoma farm boy, and he instructed the crew to bail out. He said he was going to take the airplane in. He said, "Bail out, so you guys will be safe. You don't want to be on this airplane." Only one of the 12 crew members bailed out. They all wanted to stick with him.
Wow.
And so they did, and they were all saved except that one guy that bailed out. He landed in a lake and drowned.
Oh, wow. Wow. Boy, that's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Let me one more kind of military related question. You know, I
Sure.
just relative to you, what you said you were on Okinawa from 62 to 65?
Yes, sir.
So I've been reading a lot. I mean, I love history too. So I've actually been kind of on a little kick about the Pacific, the war in the Pacific, because the Pacific does World War II. Usually a lot of the stuff focuses on the war in Europe. So I just think that the Pacific just doesn't get as much, but I've been reading a lot about it. And I just finished a book about it. Well, I read one on Iwo Jima and then Okinawa. What was it like to be on Okinawa? You're about 17 years after 1945. What was Okinawa like? What was it like to live on it, especially in the wake of the war? I mean, you hear so much about Okinawa, Iwo Jima, really all those Pacific islands, Guadalcanal and the rest of them. What was it like being there at that time period?
Well, of course, I like history myself, and I got to know uh, some of the Okinawans, and they're a wonderful, wonderful um, uh, a group of people. The
Hmm.
Japanese who now own the island, the island over after the war, and the Japanese always regarded them as the poor country cousins. They weren't living on the main island, which is the island of Japan. They were just a little offshoot island called the Ryukyu Islands, of which Okinawa is one of the Ryukyu Islands, the largest one down the line, over 300-400 miles away, south of uh, Japan. But I was impressed by the gentleness and the calmness and the wonderful nature of the Okinawan people. And I did visit the place where uh, the Okinawans were jumping off that cliff and killing themselves because the Japanese
Yeah.
told them that the Americans, when they arrived, they were monsters and they were going to torture them to death and everything. So those Okinawans have some memories, and they not all fond memories of the GIs that were there because we have, our GIs have histories of doing things when they
Sure.
occupy a country, and I'm not saying that maybe I shouldn't get into that, but I guess that's common knowledge.
Hmm.
I don't think it's prevalent. We're more of a cultured society, but uh, if one or two people go wrong, and it reflects on the whole group. Is what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say.
It doesn't take many, right? Like you say, one or two people, and that's the image.
But I had tremendous respect for the Rokinawans for what they went through, and I felt empathy for them. As I guess that's the way it was.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So you've had pretty remarkable career as you look back on, as you look back at what you've done from the military to to your Lexus experience. What are your you know what do you think of your path? Are you happy that you landed kind of in the middle in healthcare facilities management? As you look back at it, what are your thoughts? What are some, you're great. I mean, you're great on kind of simple lessons you learned. What have you learned along the way in your career?
Well, I've learned that if you smile at you pass somebody in the hallway, you pass somebody in the grocery store, you're sitting at a red light, and you look over and see somebody there, you smile at them,
Hmm.
and a smile goes a long way. It
Yeah.
not only brightens your day, but I think in 90% of the cases it may brighten their day. And I think we should be kind to each other and be respectful and honor other people's beliefs. We don't all have to believe in the same thing, but we should respect the way other people believe
Hmm.
about things and
Yeah.
just generally have empathy for each other. I think that's kind of what it's all about. And then
That's
the other thing is, don't ever regret. I tell kids this. They're growing up. I said you come to a crossroad where you're going to go take. You're either going to paint the house black or you're going to paint it green, or you're going to get a Chevy or a Ford, or you're going to get this job or that job, and you head down that left fork, and it turns out you're halfway down there, and it turns out that's a disaster. And the other opportunity is gone. You should never ever regret doing anything in your life, because if you decide at that crossroads through good planning and good appraisal of the situation and problem solving, and know at that time you're doing the right thing, regret later years and 40 years later and so on, it's toxic, and it'll put stress on your life for the rest of your life. So just forget about it. You did the right thing at that time. And that's a big lesson that I've learned.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one. I think so often we try to retroactively manage what we did 30, 35 years ago, but it's a different, I mean, you can't even compare them. It's just such a different time. That's really good advice. And that kind of, I wanted to ask you one last question. And I know I said we'd kind of
Sir.
wrap it, especially with your lesson on, empathy and not regret. But I wanted to ask you, when you were telling the story, I was like, I got to ask you. So I'm going back to 1980. You're retired, you're a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. You're sending out resumes, you're not getting any replies. What are you thinking at that point in your life? Do you remember? Are you kind of, I'm sure you're not feeling sorry for yourself because you're not wired that way, but are you thinking, man, I was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force and I can't get a call back?
I'll tell you the way I felt. I told my wife, I said, look, I'm not getting anything. And I had just read a book by Studs Terkel. Studs
Oh,
Terkel was a
yeah.
newspaper reporter and author out of Chicago. And Studs Terkel had written a book, and the name of the book was Working. And what he did, he went out and interviewed telephone operators, elevator operators, CEOs, physicians, secretaries, all people from all walks of life, interviewed them about their job. And it was so interesting to hear what other people, educated, not educated, so on, all through the 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 threads of life. It sounded so interesting. I told my wife, I said, "Look, if nothing comes up within a few more months, so I'm going to take a little time, and I'm going to go to J.C. Penney over there at the mall, and I'm going to try to get a job in the men's shirt department. I'll do that for a while. And then I'm going to get a job at mess storist restaurant in Bordentown. I'm going to be a busboy, and then I think I might become a waiter there. And then I'm going to think of another job to do, just to learn how other people
Yeah.
fare. And I think it'd be fantastic. And she said, "No, you're not." And I guess she was right. Uh, she said, "Your first thing you're going to do, you're not going to like working for somebody that's younger than you." Well, my boss at Deborah was 25 years younger than I, and I readily accepted him because he was the boss. He had gained that position. He'd been there in the healthcare field a lot longer than I, and so I relied on my feelings that you have to accept people and you do the best you can.
Well, that's great. And then the rest is history. We know what happened after that. That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, I have no regrets really. I've done some really stupid things, and I've been in situations, not even in the military, where I was at risk for getting killed. I fell out. I got drunk and fell out of a 4-story building one time in Okinawa.
Okay, I was gonna stop the podcast, but wait, just you gotta. So, how did you survived? Obviously, I'm talking to you.
Well,
Um,
the University of Maryland and probably any college, they stress. They all say no drinking because
oh
we're all
yeah,
underage.
yeah,
But everybody joins a fraternity or sorority, and everybody drinks.
yeah,
And I was a
yep,
good little boy in high school, and I never, we didn't even have drugs in my time in high school.
yep.
But I didn't drink. I didn't run with a crowd that did drink. As soon as I got into college, I was a wuss. I became a wuss because I joined the fraternity, and oh, Shoemaker, you're a wuss, and you're not one of us, really, and we're disappointed in you. What are you going to have at the what are you going to have at the party this weekend? And we're going to take you into DC, and you're going to get a bottle. So I reluctantly went in there, and I went into the clerk, and I remembered my grandmother, my great grandmother, made blackberry brandy, and so I said, do you have blackberry brandy? And they said, well, I think we may have some in the back. So they came out. They said, yeah, we've got, how much do you want? And I said, well, how about a half a pint? So my fraternity brothers are just about rolling around on the ground laughing, almost. They said, you're gonna buy a half pint of blackberry brandy, and so then I developed into drinking a lot in college and are forsaking my academics. I made it through, but uh, and then go into the service. You're a wuss if you don't go to the officers club after
Sure.
work every day. Uh, but I got out of that, and then I got sent to Okinawa, and my one of my friends in my squadron, uh, we said, "What? Let's go out to dinner. We'll go to the Tea House of the August Moon, which is downtown Naha, the capital of Okinawa, and we'll have a nice dinner." And of course, we were drinking. Of course, we had a couple of drinks at his house before we left. We were both living on base, so we drive downtown, park the car, and uh, we start after drinking beer at his house, and we start drink warm sake at the restaurant. Which, if you drink anything warm like that, that's actually heated. It really gets into your system a lot quicker. So we had a nice meal. We were all pretty half smashed,
I know the
and
feeling.
so we decided to go downtown and walk around and walk it off. So the two girls, the two wives, are following us, and we get a little bit ahead of them. So we turn the corner, and I see this fire escape dead ahead. So I said, Bob, let's run up the fire escape and lose the women. Play a joke on them. So I go first, and I'm running up this fire escape. I get to the top, and I keep right on going over the side. I fell 4 stories into a
Wow.
benjo ditch.
Wow.
In Okinawa, they had a benjo ditch is an open sewer. It's
Okay,
not a pipe.
I was gonna ask what a benjo ditch was.
Yep,
Oof.
it's a cut in the concrete where it's an open sewer where the sewage
Wow.
just run.
How deep are they?
It was about about 8 inches deep and about 8 inches wide, I guess. And there was a protuberance of a pipe coming at an angle up out of the ground. It was about 6 inches from my head.
Oh my God.
I landed on my right side, and the only injury was uh, a hairline fracture of my right acetabula. The acetabula is the socket for your hip.
Wow.
And so I was in the hospital. Uh, I was in the hospital for about a month, I guess. And the day after I got to the hospital, my squadron commander came up and he said, "Okay, Shoemaker, what did you do? What happened?" Well, he knew what happened, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
said, "Well, sir, I got out of line. I got drunk, and we, was with Bob and our two wives, and I got drunk and got did something stupid, ran up the fire escape and fell off." He said, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow." And he came back the next day and he said, "I talked to the old man, which was his boss, the wing commander, the full colonel." He said, "I talked to the boss." He said, "That's what I wanted to hear." He said, "Shoemaker was honest about it. He told us what happened." He said, we're going to protect him." He said, "I don't want anything in Shoemaker's records about this, and let him stay in the hospital until he heals, and then he's going to get back to work, and he's going to work hard." So so that's the way they handled me. Now my career could have been gone right then.
Right, right. And Jim, that's actually one of my final questions to you was, what did you learn? And you said empathy, and you said, being being ready, and then also there's another one, right? Being truthful. So that's a third one. Absolutely. So Jim Shoemaker,
Yes, sir.
retired Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Air Force, retired Director of Plant Operations, retired from Lexus, retired past president of the ASHE, uh, ASHE, the American Society of Healthcare Engineers. How funny, Jim. What does ASHE mean? Anyway, so I appreciate your time. It was great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Well, it was totally my pleasure, and I want to mention something about Peter Martin, who's president of Gosselin Associates. Uh, well, we went to a conference. I think it was in Chicago one time, and he saw me. He he saw me struggling with my bag, and he said, "Here, let me help you." And he came over, just talking about having empathy, and he came over and helped me with my bag, helped me my bags, helped me offload the bags, and then I happened to see him and his partner as we're bailing out of the
Mm, mm.
hotel at the end of that week, and he said, "Why don't you join us in the cab?" And he said, "I'll help you with your bag again." Now, talking about having empathy and being a kind person and a wonderful person, this is I don't know whether I've ever said this to you before, Pete, but you're a pic, what is it, a poster boy for being kind to people and being nice and being honest and truthful and all the good qualities. So
Well, thank you,
that's the way
Jim.
I feel about Pete Martin.
Oh man, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And listen, I'm glad it happened because ever since that, I've enjoyed seeing you at the ASHE annual when you're there. So I've enjoyed our relationship, and I appreciate that, Jim. Thank you so
Me
much.
too. And thanks for the opportunity to do this. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. I wish I had thought of it sooner, but better late than never, right?
Sure.
So, Jim Shoemaker, thank you for joining. This is Peter Martin from Gosselin Martin Associates. As always, I appreciate you listening, and we will be back in the future with another episode of High Reliability. Have a great day, everybody.